You stand at the edge of a perfectly still lake in Cameroon. Beneath you is enough invisible gas to erase every breath from the valley, and in 1986, that is exactly what happened. By the end, you'll know how an entire landscape suffocated without fire, poison, or warning, why survivors seem to awaken among the dead, and what keeps this lake from killing again. To understand what happened, you have to come here in your imagination. Northwestern Cameroon. High volcanic country. The road narrows until it becomes little more than red earth threading between steep green slopes. Then the land opens, and Lake Nyos appears. It does not look violent. There is no boiling lava. No tower of smoke. No obvious crater glowing beneath the clouds. The water sits inside the remains of an ancient volcanic explosion, surrounded by farmland and villages whose people once slept within walking distance of the shore. That is what makes the place so disturbing. You are looking at a crime scene where the weapon left almost nothing behind. Houses were not flattened. Trees were not burned. The dead showed few outward injuries. Cooking fires, tools, clothing, and household objects remained where their owners had left them. The landscape survived. The people did not. On August 21, 1986, at least 1,700 people died around this lake, along with thousands of cattle and countless wild animals. Some victims fell near their homes. Others collapsed on roads, in fields, or beside relatives they had tried to wake. And for the first investigators arriving afterward, the central question sounded impossible. How could a lake kill villages without touching them? The evening began without any recognized evacuation warning. Families ate. Lamps burned. Livestock settled into their enclosures. Darkness gathered inside the valleys below the lake. Then came reports of a strange sound, a rumble, an explosion, perhaps the roar of water. Witness accounts differed, because the people closest to the source were the least likely to survive. Something had disturbed the lake. A violent upwelling appears to have lifted deep water toward the surface. A plume rose above the crater. The normally blue water later appeared reddish-brown, stained as iron-rich water from below met the air. But the real killer could not be seen. A massive quantity of carbon dioxide escaped from the lake and spilled over the crater's rim. Because carbon dioxide is denser than ordinary air, it did not simply rise and disperse. It sank. The gas poured downhill, followed stream beds, and collected inside low valleys. It moved like a flood with no visible water, replacing breathable air as it advanced. People caught inside high concentrations may have become confused, collapsed, and lost consciousness within moments. Lamps could remain standing. Walls could remain intact. The night itself seemed unchanged. But every breath pulled the victims deeper into danger. Imagine waking after hours of darkness and realizing the world has gone silent. No conversations. No animals. No morning movement from neighboring homes. Some survivors reportedly regained consciousness surrounded by dead relatives. Others had been away from the lowest ground or had encountered a weaker concentration of gas. What they saw created immediate terror because there was no ordinary sign of disaster. The victims had not been shot. There was no epidemic anyone recognized. There were no collapsed buildings pointing to an earthquake. Even vegetation was largely standing. That detail mattered. A wildfire would have scarred the land. A conventional explosion would have shattered structures. Many toxic chemicals would have left burns, residue, or a persistent odor. But carbon dioxide can be colorless and odorless. In overwhelming concentrations, it deprives the body of usable air and disrupts respiration before a victim fully understands what is happening. To outsiders, the scene invited darker explanations. Rumors spread of secret weapons, military experiments, volcanic poison, even supernatural punishment. Those theories were understandable. Investigators were staring at intact villages filled with bodies. Yet the first major clue was not found in the homes. It was waiting inside the lake. But before we get to what scientists found beneath Lake Nyos, you need to understand something even stranger. This had happened before. 2 years earlier, at Lake Nyos roughly 100 kilometers away, another sudden gas release killed 37 people. Victims were found along a road, and the pattern baffled investigators. A crater lake had apparently released carbon dioxide, yet the event was so unusual that it did not produce a clear warning system for every similar lake nearby. That earlier tragedy should have made Nyos unthinkable. Instead, it made Nyos recognizable only after the bodies were counted. Both lakes lie within the Cameroon volcanic line, a chain of volcanic features running across the region. Magma deep underground releases carbon dioxide. That gas can travel upward through rock and enter groundwater, which carries it into the bottom of a crater lake. Normally, a lake mixes. Cooler surface water sinks, deeper water rises, and dissolved gases escape gradually. But deep tropical crater lakes can behave differently. Their layers may remain separated for long periods. Cold, dense bottom water stays trapped beneath warmer water above it. Year after year, the deepest layer quietly absorbs more carbon dioxide. The lake does not look more dangerous. It simply becomes more loaded. Think of the deep lake as a sealed bottle of soda. Under pressure, gas remains dissolved in liquid. Open the bottle slowly, and the gas escapes as manageable bubbles. Shake it or release the pressure suddenly, and the liquid erupts. At Lake Nyos, the weight of nearly 200 meters of water helped keep enormous quantities of carbon dioxide dissolved near the bottom. Then something began lifting that saturated water. The exact trigger remains debated. A landslide may have displaced water. Cooling rain may have caused part of the lake to overturn. A small disturbance on the lake bed may have started the rise. Scientists understand the runaway mechanism far better than the first push. Once deep water rose, pressure decreased. Carbon dioxide formed bubbles. Those bubbles made the water more buoyant, so it rose faster. Faster ascent released more gas, creating more bubbles and even faster ascent. A small disturbance became a self-amplifying eruption. The lake effectively uncorked itself. Water and gas surged upward. An immense volume of carbon dioxide burst into the open air, crossed the crater rim, and descended into inhabited valleys. And still, that does not explain the most terrifying part. Why did so many people fail to run? You imagine suffocation as a slow struggle. Lake Nyos offered something far more abrupt. In a concentrated carbon dioxide cloud, breathing faster does not save you. Each breath draws in more gas while oxygen has been displaced. High exposure can cause headache, confusion, loss of coordination, unconsciousness, and death with terrifying speed. Now place the cloud in darkness. It follows the ground. It fills hollows. It pours through the exact valleys where homes and livestock are concentrated. A person awakened by a sound may step outside and descend into thicker gas. Someone bending toward a fallen relative lowers their face closer to the densest layer. There may be no flame to flee and no visible wall approaching. Only weakness, dizziness, and then nothing. This explains the strange geography investigators documented. Death was concentrated along the gas cloud's downhill path. Higher ground offered better odds. The cloud traveled for kilometers, asphyxiating people and animals while leaving buildings and much of the plant life untouched. The silence was not mysterious anymore. It was evidence. The lake had not poisoned the villages in the usual sense. It had displaced the one thing every victim needed second by second. Lake Nyos had stolen the air. Here is the full reveal. Lake Nyos was not merely a crater filled with water. It was a natural pressure vessel. Carbon dioxide from deep magmatic sources had entered the lake from below and accumulated inside its isolated bottom layer. The water concealed the gas so completely that people could farm, sleep, and raise families nearby without seeing the reservoir growing beneath them. Then, on August 21, 1986, the layered system destabilized. Gas-saturated water rose. Pressure fell. Bubbles expanded. The lake erupted from within, releasing perhaps around a cubic kilometer of carbon dioxide-rich gas when expanded into the atmosphere. That invisible mass moved downhill under its own density and entered the valleys around Nyos, Subum, Cha, and nearby settlements. At least 1,700 people died. Thousands of cattle were lost. Survivors were displaced, and communities built over generations were emptied in a single night. No conventional volcanic eruption was required. No lava crossed the land. No secret weapon had to be tested. The mechanism was natural, rare, and horrifyingly efficient. The lake became deadliest at the moment it appeared least active. And when investigators measured the water afterward, they found something even more disturbing: carbon dioxide was beginning to accumulate again. You cannot evacuate an entire region forever. And you cannot remove the magma beneath it. So scientists chose an idea that sounds almost absurd: give the lake a permanent straw. A pipe was lowered into the deepest gas-rich water. At first, pumping brought that water upward. As pressure decreased inside the pipe, carbon dioxide formed bubbles. The bubbly mixture became lighter and accelerated toward the surface, creating a self-sustaining fountain. The same runaway physics that caused the disaster could now be controlled. Instead of allowing gas to accumulate for decades and escape catastrophically, the pipes release it gradually. Additional pipes were later installed to increase the degassing rate. A fountain rising from the lake became a sign not of eruption, but prevention. Yet engineering the gas was only part of the danger. Lake Nyos is held in place along one side by a natural dam of volcanic rock. Erosion and structural weakness raised fears that the barrier could fail, sending water downstream and potentially disturbing the lake itself. Work has been undertaken to strengthen the dam and manage the risk. This is why the site remains haunting. The disaster is over, but the system that created it still exists. Nyos changed the way scientists look at deep volcanic lakes. A beautiful surface is not proof of safety. The real questions lie below: is gas entering from underground? Do the water layers mix? How much pressure is building at depth? Could a landslide, earthquake, cooling event, or other disturbance start a runaway release? Only a small number of lakes are known to present this kind of threat. But one of them exists on a far larger scale. Lake Kivu, between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, contains enormous quantities of dissolved carbon dioxide and methane beneath its surface, with millions of people living in the surrounding region. Its chemistry and management are not identical to Nyos, but the lesson is unavoidable. The worst natural hazards do not always announce themselves with shaking ground or black skies. Sometimes the warning is a measurement buried in a table. Sometimes survival depends on scientists noticing what the human eye cannot. And sometimes the quietest landscape in front of you is only quiet because its pressure has not yet been released. Standing beside Lake Nyos today, you would hear insects, wind, water, and perhaps the engineered fountain keeping the depths under control. You would also understand why this place feels different. The tragedy exposed a vulnerability so basic that it is almost impossible to imagine. Every person in those valleys depended on an invisible mixture of gases surrounding them. When that mixture changed, there was no wall to resist it and almost no time to understand. Lake Nyos did not chase its victims. It waited above them, then sent gravity to do the rest. That is the secret the silent villages forced the world to uncover. Danger does not need to look violent. It only needs to alter something you trust without thinking. The ground beneath you. The water beside you. Or the next breath entering your lungs. If this broke your brain a little, subscribe. We drop one of these every week. And next time, we're opening the files on a factory scandal where workers were instructed to shape radioactive paint with their lips. The radium girls were told their poisoning was harmless.